Good evening, everybody. This is Patrick from the Poison Pen Bookstore in Scottsdale, Arizona. And thanks for joining us for another virtual event. And we're delighted to have Stephen Spotswood back with us to talk about his brand new book called Dead in the Frame. And Stephen signed a batch of books for us. And I will go ahead and put a link to our signed copies in the comments field if you'd like to grab one before they're gone. So we don't have that many left. And but if you have questions for Stephen, go ahead and type them in. And then Barbara, as usual, will bring me on screen towards the end of the hour. And I'll be happy to ask any of your questions. So Barbara, over to you.
Thank you very much. Sorry, I'm chewing on a lemon drop so that it'll clear my throat so I can
Mm,
actually talk. So I've had the pleasure of talking to Stephen. I think we've done it for all of your books, haven't we?
I think so. Yeah. 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 Even
Sure.
from, yeah.
So this is book five. Alas, we have not yet gotten Stephen to Scottsdale, but I live in hope. And I must say that, living in DC, but do you actually live in DC?
I live in DC. I'm not in Virginia or Maryland. I am in the district.
Right.
Yes.
An interesting place to be in present circumstances.
Interesting's a word. Yeah. I mean, there are others I'd use. I don't think I'd say any of them on the spot
Well,
on this recording, but yeah.
no, I understand that. But anyway, so it's an escape in a way from whatever is going on in DC to be writing about 1947 New York,
Yes.
which is a good thing. So, inevitably, and I will point out that Stephen has won a Nero Wolf Award for one of his books. Which one is it, Stephen? I don't remember.
Oh, Lord.
Okay.
I think it was Fortune Favors the Dead. I think it was the first one.
I'll bet it says
Um,
in your biographies.
yeah.
Well, it was the 2021 Nero Wolf Award for Best American
Yeah.
Mystery.
So it was the Fortune Favors the
Okay.
Dead. Yeah. The first one.
And in fact, you have to read these in the spirit of Nero Wolfe, who, of course, was a hero for many and certainly an author I grew up reading. But in this particular book, I'm also reminded of a Marjorie Allingham book. And the reason I say that is that there's in order to make this book work, Stephen has to basically create a kind of impossible crime and put one of his two leads in danger. In fact, actually have her imprisoned as a, potential culprit for the crime, and then figure out how to solve the impossible crime and get her out. And Marjorie Allingham did the same thing, and I can't remember how long ago. And I mean, I've always thought it was a fascinating, and I don't mean to imply that you're stealing plots because there are only so many plots, right?
Oh, yeah. True. Very much
But
so.
I do love that idea. I've always liked locker room mysteries. And then I think the impossible crime. In other words, everything looks as though a person was murdered and somebody, committed the crime. And then your task is to set it all up and then figure out how, in fact, that might not be true. Or maybe it is true.
Yeah. 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 I have to make it. Yeah. No, I have to make it as hard as possible for Will and Lillian to dig themselves out. Yeah.
Indeed. So Will is really our narrator, right? She's our largely point of view, although you bring in Miss Pentecost in a written word form.
Yeah. I did it once before in Fortune Favors the Dead in Lillian's notes, but in this one, since not really a spoiler alert because it says it on the back of the book. Like Ms. Pentecost spends most of the book in jail. Like she spends most of it in the New York City Women's House of Detention. And so is having like if to not have her point of view would be to have this massive gap um in the book. So it was a joy to like have that second point of view voice.
Absolutely.
It
Well,
was
she
fun.
can't be sitting in the office talking to Will.
Yeah.
So, I think that was a good way to bring it in. But Will's a really free spirit for her time. Or maybe she isn't a real free spirit. It's just that we think she's a free spirit for her time. How much do you think there were actually women like Will doing stuff like Will and back then?
I there were plenty of them. They don't get written about as much. But there were plenty of women like Will, working in fields, like law enforcement, like private investigation, as defense attorneys and prosecutors and like that whole side of Law and Order. Uh, I don't think, and don't think they have quite as many like pulpy adventures as Will does. That's sort of like the dialing it up to 11 that I do with these books. It's like adding that pulp quality to things. Um, but in the research that I've done, and to be clear, like the books are fiction. Like a lot of places in the scenarios and the characters are fiction. But in the research I've done, I've come across so many women who are inspirations for both Will and Lillian and all of the recurring characters that pop up again and again in the books.
Sure. I mean, I think we have a tendency to think in the late 40s that women were more likely to be typists or, fulfilling clerical functions, although clearly, since women did men's jobs and really important jobs, even muscular jobs during the war, I don't think that that assumption can really hold up. But it was sort of reinforced in the 50s when there was kind of like a retrogression back to, you know, um, women in high heels and dresses and perfectly coiffed hair, vacuuming their house or making pies for their kids or something. And Will certainly cuts against that type.
Yeah, yeah, I'm looking forward to. I really hope I have the opportunity to bring these characters into the 1950s and just show that conflict, show the tension between them and the retrograde culture of the time. Because just fascinating, like the looking at say like back to the 20 like the Roaring Twenties and women in the Roaring Twenties and like the things that they could do and were seen doing, and then like going into the 30s and then the 40s with like women taking over factory jobs and filling this massive labor gap. And then the 50s where everything just sort of like gets shrunk back down and the opportunities go away and the culture sort of creates a little tiny box for them.
There's a very interesting parallel being written by an author named Alison Montclair, which is a pseudonym. But anyway, it's set in England in exactly the same time period and
Hmm.
involves two women who are trying to forge different paths. It's 1947. I'm trying to remember, 45. I think we're up in 6 books to 49, maybe something like that. Anyway, the last one involves the BBC in the very, very, very beginnings of television, but the issues are the same, about women not accepting stereotypical roles. But the other thing I think is interesting, you make a really strong case in this book for how horrible the House of Detention was in New York. I mean, you're pretty graphic in describing it, and it was awful. And a woman in this other series was incarcerated not incarcerated, but made a ward of, I'm trying to remember the whole deal. But anyway, she was thought to be an hysteric, and her family, um, you know, it put her in the lunacy. I'm trying to remember. She's a ward of the lunacy court or something. But anyway, the point is that there were places that you could kind of dispose of women who didn't necessarily create a crime. Lillian, I'm sorry, yeah, Lillian is here because she's been arrested for murder, but there were probably women in there who were being incarcerated just because they were a nuisance.
Oh, very much so. I got really lucky when I started writing or started drafting like the first draft of this book, because there's an author and researcher named Hugh Ryan who had just published a book on on the House of Detention. It's called the New York City Women's House of Detention, a queer history of a forgotten prison. And he did so much research of like pulling up the testimonies of women who had been incarcerated there and then interviewing ones who were still alive. Um, and it was fascinating and awful to read about how easy it was to bend the law to incarcerate women who simply just did not fit into society standards for being a woman, um, and just how this awful place existed for so long, and like prisons
Mhm.
like it still exists today. It's just that this one was like right there in Greenwich Village
Right.
for 5 decades, and now has since been torn down and is a flower garden.
You
But you
mentioned
can,
that in your note afterward, and
yeah,
I thought of all the times I've been in New York, I'm trying to remember if I've ever walked through that garden and not even thought about what his
you
antecedents
you
were.
wouldn't like if there's one plaque outside that has like a like one sentence of like this used to be the women's health detention. Otherwise, you would just go. It's the Jefferson Market Garden.
Hmm.
You would just walk in and it's very pleasant, but you would never know what was there.
You know, Wilkie Collins, when he wrote The Woman in White, illustrated the same thing about how easy it was to, dispose of a woman by incarcerating her or, putting her in Bedlam or some version of Bedlam. In fact, that's how it all happens as she escapes. And in real life, as I understand it, Collins was inspired to write the book because he encountered a young woman like that fleeing from whatever place this
Mm,
was, or needing to be sprung from whatever place it was. But women traditionally, have been difficult women, whatever, have been easily put away.
yes, yeah, and easily put away, and then the history easily erased.
Yep.
Yeah.
So anyway, we are in a sort of Nero Wolf. I mean, aside from all these other authors I've narrated, I think really Wolf comes up in reading reviews and thinking about. So, are you a fan? I'm sure I've asked you this before, but are you a serious Rex Stout fan? Was that an inspiration for you?
I am a serious Rex Stout fan. That was it was a direct inspiration. I had done back in 2018. I did a read of all of the Nero Wolfe novels from the first one to the last one, including all the short stories, and that was the inspiration. That was like the initial inspiration for these characters. Basically, I was like, if I was given the IP, if I was given the chance to write uh, Nero Wolfe and Archie Goodwin in the 21st century, um, because like the world changes, they never do. From the 30s through the 70s, like those characters never change. And I thought, well, what if they were brought into the 21st century? What would that be? What would that look like? And I was just like, I don't think I would want to. Something would just like fall apart. But in thinking about that, I thought about, well, what's the fun part of this dynamic? And it's that the acerbic genius detective, um, and like the wisecracking right-hand person with a hard-boiled voice, who's the point of view character who goes out and gets in trouble and collects clues. Um, and that's where Will and Lillian came from, is basically taking the sort of like the scaffolding of the Nero Wolfe stories and figuring out what to do with it, like what I would do with it.
Well, sure. I
Yeah.
mean, to a bit, it's the Holmes Watson thing as well. Although I think that Will certainly has more agency than Watson. I mean, I like Watson, but he's deliberately made a little bit. Um, what's the right word? I don't think bumbling is fair, but anyway, he is definitely in a lower, intellectual plane or whatever it is than Holmes, where I think Will, she may not be the genius that Lillian is, but Will's pretty smart and really
Yeah.
aggressive.
Yeah, I mean, like in Fortune, in the first book, I sort of set it up that I mean, Lillian is ill. She has multiple sclerosis. It's a progressive disease. Eventually, it's going to affect her mind. She knows, and so Will is her protege. So Will has that. Like Will has to become Lillian's like as close to as good as Lillian as she can, because someday she's going to take over for her. At least that's like the intention. Um, so yeah, so that's there. So Will cannot be Watson. Like Will have cannot just rest on her laurels. She can't just be the assistant forever.
Right. Well, she's more like Archie, but Nero Wolf had his handicaps too. I mean, he was basically agoraphobic. He was overweight. He was like captivated by his orchids and, also in the kitchen. I mean, he lived where he could. He lived within the parameters of his townhouse. I mean, there's one where he goes to Montenegro, and there's,
Yep.
another one where I'm trying to remember, was he present in the one with the banquet, that sort of version of the closed where a person dies at a banquet and only the servers and only the people at the banquet
Yeah,
eating,
I think he was. I think he
wasn't he?
was there.
I think he was too.
Yeah,
It's a rare thing. Normally,
yeah.
he's not there. And so, Archie really is a gumshoe. I mean, in that sort of classic phrase. And you couldn't really do that today. Private eyes, are not out as a rule beating the streets.
No, they're online. Like private eyes just have like access to really good software. They have like good
Yeah.
subscriptions. Like that's like three-quarters of the job. Yeah.
Well, some of them work for lawyers and actually have to get out and do some street work and all. But yeah, to a great degree, that I think it would be very hard to write the construct that you are writing if you brought it into the 21st century.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah, like just the internet and cell phones, man. That just sort of pokes a hole in so many impossible plots.
So, as a backstory for Lillian, tell us a little bit about the fact she has a family history that you bring into play.
She does. And we got a little bit in the previous book and more in this one. Um, we learn that I'm trying to think about like I have I have a skeleton draft of the next book. So I'm like trying to like
Getting
make
in
sure
your
I
way.
do not spoil anything for any future books.
Right.
Um, but we find out that when Lillian was young, when she was a teenager, her mother was arrested for the murder of a man with whom she was accused of having an affair. And then uh, died in like this is a mild spoiler for midway through the book. Um, but then her mother, but so hit pause or not pause, but mute if you don't want to hear it. But then her mother committed suicide while awaiting trial. And it's like it's a thing that has haunted Lillian her entire life. And it's also a a source of oh, I say family shame, I guess is part of it. But it's like the inciting incident of Dead in the Frame and sort of the end of the previous book is that her like enemy, longtime enemy, Jessup Quincannon, um, got some dirt, like uncovered her history, and threatened to reveal it to the world, to like spread her mother's the murder accusation and her mother's suicide all across the papers. And that is the motive that Lillian is that they attribute to Lillian, and the reason that she is supposed to have murdered Jessup Quincannon. Which again, it's on the back of the book, so I don't feel like I'm spoiling anything
No,
there.
you're not. But there again, you couldn't really do that as a motive much in the 21st century because shame appears to be something people brag about today rather than try to conceal.
Mhm.
I mean, honestly, celebrations of terrible behavior go on around us all the time. And I think, I named the bookstore after poison pen letters, which was, gossip circulating in the village by an earlier version of email or
Mhm.
fax. Um, and that was really believable then, but I think it's much harder today to convince people that killing somebody over revealing something like that is what people would do. It can still happen, but I don't think it's as powerful a motive as it once was.
It might not be as I don't know if it's as I mean, it helps that Jessup Quincannon is just such a slime ball. Like he was so fun to write. But he's just such an awful human that you can easily believe someone wanting to murder him, just on a whim. Uh, but like I think the thing that could not happen today is that now today, if you wanted to, like, it would be all over the internet. Like Lillian's whole history would be on the internet.
Exactly.
And here it's because she grew up at this is like 1912, 1913 we're talking about. Like the records are lost. Nobody knows where Lillian Pentecost came from. She just sort of appeared whole cloth as a working detective. And that's like that kind of conceit you can't have in the 21st century. Like that's not possible. Or at least it's more difficult.
It
Yeah.
would be more difficult. Well, you have a lot of players in this book. I mean, it takes a lot of people to make, in this part we won't talk about because it would be spoilers, but it takes a lot of people to make things work in the plot. But like like Rex Stout, you do knit it all together in the end. I always loved it, when they gathered in the study and, and it was always I just love that structure.
Yeah, yeah, no, and it's really nice. It's fun that I could do it sort of in this book or like do a take on it.
Yeah.
Um, it's sort of like turn that idea on its head. But yeah, this was fun coming up with the cast of characters for this. Um, all the people that Jessup Quincannon can bring together into a room. It's like that was one of the great parts about having him as a character because I had an excuse to just write anybody, from ministers to brain surgeons to gunmen, all in the same room together.
You
It's
did,
fun.
even cops. I know.
Hmm.
You mentioned brain surgeons. How much work did you do on lobotomies? Because this is a period in which lobotomies were thought, and I think they were not always, but probably more often targeted women, or maybe I'm being unfair there. Maybe they were just targeting anybody that was behaving erratically or badly or depressed or whatever.
Yes. I don't think you're being unfair. I think like yes, it was considered like a legitimate treatment for people with various kinds of mental illness, even like down to simple as depression. However, I think men's behavior is more easily excused than women's, so women would be more likely to like have family that would be like, okay, we're gonna go to see the doctor, and he's gonna, right in your skull,
Well,
and
it's easy to
we'll take
think
care of
about.
you.
Yeah, Rosemary Kennedy, is
Hmm.
a prime example of that. I mean, I have no idea what her situation would have been without the lobotomy, but and even the circumstances for her birth are really horrendous. I mean, it isn't necessarily true that she, you know, had to be the way she was. But we won't go into that. I think the whole Kennedy saga is pretty dreadful. But anyway, I did think it was interesting that one of the characters you brought in here is a guy who is his specialty as a surgeon is lobotomy.
Yeah, it was fun. It was and also that he's in the room or he's in the house when somebody gets a bullet in their skull, and he's known for putting holes in people's skulls. So it's like we get to make a few like halfway decent puns throughout the book. So yeah.
Part of your large cast. So there's a little bit of meta in this, in the sense that you do have somebody also working on a book as part of your cast. Will's, you know, I don't
I
even right word is, lover, sometimes partner, whatever it might be.
Oh yeah, yes. It's actually two people writing it, but there's two people writing books in this. Because the reporter will also
Right.
be eventually writing a book. Um, but yeah, we start off well, we ended, I guess actually the last book and this one. Will's partner Holly has been writing her debut novel. Um, and that's where Will and Holly had been. That's how I got Will off the board, is that she and Holly had been up um in the Poconos with no phone and no newspapers, and Holly's been finishing her book for the last 3 weeks. So like that is how all this happened while Will was away. Um, but yeah, it is. I do try not to get too meta, but I mean Holly writes crime fiction, so it's hard not to.
Well, I think it's fun. Of course, once again, you couldn't use that device in the age of cell phones. It's almost impossible to actually shut somebody off from the world for like 3 weeks today, regardless of where they're located.
Yes. Yeah.
In other words, you need to stick to you need to stick to this period.
Yep. Gotta stick to the
Even
1940s.
advancing into the 50s, you're still okay,
Yes. Yeah.
right?
Yes. Yeah. I'll still be fine in the 50s. Yeah.
So you're a reporter yourself. You had fun with this reporter from the New York Times. How do you see him? Is he kind of a sleazeball, or is he just doing his job, or what?
No, I don't think he's a sleazeball. I think he's, I think he's good at his job. I think he's arrogant. I think the arrogance, like, is what comes across. Also the fact that he and Will like were a thing back during the early days of Will's career, like in that like sort of like his sort of like paternal patriarchal attitude towards her sometimes can is grating. Um, but he's also just he's good at his job and he sees that he's like on his way out. He feels like these other young reporters nipping at his heels, so he needs to get the big story now. And he's willing to like sacrifice friendships in order to get it. Uh, which is not entirely unlike Will. Like Will is willing to sacrifice a lot in order to solve a crime, especially one where Lillian's freedom and life is on the line.
So there, many charges leveled at the media today about just going for clicks and having very little respect for anybody's privacy, whatever. And I wondered in a way if this guy wasn't like a precursor of that, because he seems willing to sort of transcend any boundaries in order to get a hot story.
I don't know if he's a precursor because like looking at just like the New York Times archives and also the yellow journalism of the turn of the century, the turn of the previous century. Um, like that was there. Like true crime was huge. Um, like all the pulp magazines that were centered on true crime, that just clogged the bookshelves of newsstands. So like that appetite I think existed. And there were reporters and writers and who were willing who like were feeding it um, all through the 20th century. Um, but I do think like we hit the 50s and the 60s, then like it starts becoming I guess more mainstream, I guess, more accepted, bigger names, Truman Capote, um, doing that kind of thing. I don't know. I'm
Well, there
I'm
were,
babbling.
when I was young,
Yeah.
because I was young in the 50s, there were all kinds of, like gossip magazines from Hollywood, and people like Luella Parsons and Hedda Hopper and so forth. You were, digging dirt all the time and writing exposes. So there was always that kind of clicks, just it was printed rather than
Mhm.
digital. But you're right, it was very much on display. And today, I'm really fascinated that the role of podcasters is kind of, true crime podcasters have to some degree replaced the old private eye in crime fiction. In fact, John Sanford's new novel that we're going to launch on March 24th is about an old crime, and somebody offers a reward for a cold case, and it brings out all of these true crime podcasters,
Oh, that's exciting.
partly for the money, but mostly to try to beat everybody else, to get the clicks and go online. So it's really like the kind of journalism that you're writing about in this book. It's so similar.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's like crowdsourcing investigations and having access to hundreds of thousands of listeners who can send in tips, who can do like go online, do the genealogy research of things like that.
Well, there are
Yeah.
those tools, right? But in quite a few more recent crime fiction novels, the protagonist is a podcaster. It's not Spencer,
Hmm.
or it's not, Elvis Cole. It is a podcaster.
Yeah.
Sometimes they're under threat, from people that may feel that they're about to unearth uncomfortable things, but sometimes they're just investigators. But you're right, crowdsourcing then becomes a tool for these people, you know, um, in a way that, like, if you read, we do all the legacy Robert Parker authors all come to the
Mm.
bookstore because Bob and I were friends and we did it forever. And, it's really interesting to see, like in John's book and some other books, how the podcasters are sort of behaving like Spencer, using the Boston police force and, the guy at the gym and Hawk and all. I mean, it's a very similar kind of investigative community, but it's just been updated to, new
Hmm.
technology.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah. Oh, now I'm just excited for John Sanford's next book. I've also read everything he's ever written.
Well, I love John, and I this is called Lethal Prey, and I've convinced his publisher to. John's a photographer; he loves photography, and so we pried out of him a photograph that he took, and then kind of a self-portrait, which we Putnam is creating an insert for the book, to
Oh,
sort of
that's cool.
yeah, which I
Hey.
think is a great idea. But this one brings Virgil, again, meta. Virgil's more interested in writing his book than he is in detecting. Lucas is kind of impatient with that. But then I think, because, John's a Pulitzer Prize winning reporter, so he brings that whole kind of sensibility that he has from that into this group of true crime podcasters and influencers who are attracted by the $5 million reward for
Mm,
trying to solve the 20-year-old cold case. It's really interesting how it goes about it. And he tells us how the crime was committed and who did it in the first chapter. So, it's an interesting story, telling technique that I think is fun for the reader. It's one of those things where the reader knows more than the detectives.
yeah. It's so hard to do, and he does it really well. The fun is like seeing how the killer and basically how the detectives figure out what you already know. Yeah,
Yeah, well, John's
it's really
not an easy interview because he's kind of brusque about how he does everything, but do watch it because we'll be streaming it, and
cool.
Bart and I will attempt to drag out of him of some of how he decided. I mean, he does try. I really give him big points. I'll go back to you here in a minute. This is supposed to be about John, but I do admire the fact that he tries to change up his books. He tries not to write the same book, over and over and over again.
Yeah. Yes, I agree.
So, and you're obviously doing the same thing. Um, so you do set up a future book very well at the end of this book, but you're making me nervous when you're saying you hope that you'll get to write it.
I mean, I'm not under contract for book six yet.
Um,
So I have the skeleton draft. I have like a good chunk of the beginning of it written. But right now there's not a contract, there's not a release date. So yeah, so I don't I've been getting like the book came out 2 weeks ago, and since then I've gotten so many messages from readers who have finished it and they're like, "Oh, I can't wait for the next one." And I'm like trying to be hopeful but also honest of like,
sure.
please don't hold like just patience. I don't know when the next one will be. I'm sure it will almost certainly be, it will not be like we've been doing about a year. And I'm almost positive there will be a longer delay between five and six. However it happens. Um, so yeah, in the meantime, I am like working on some Pentecost and Parker short stories to sort of tide people over and also to tide myself over, so because I can't not write these characters.
Sure.
So yeah, I'll be putting I put the first one up on my website for free. If people go there and they subscribe, they'll get the password that gives them access to that one and any future ones that I put up. Um, so yes. So I don't mean to make you worried. But it's publishing. As you know, publishing. Um,
Too. Well,
yeah.
there are various roads to publishing, which we could discuss offline at some other point. But I don't like it when series that I really like seem to, be coming to an end. So I'm pretty active in trying to work out other solutions to it.
Yes. I don't want to say it's coming to an end. I that is that is not what I want to say at all. Because I have six planned. I have books beyond that planned. I've had a larger structure um in my head since the first book. Like I've had things plotted out for
I think,
years.
writing it into the 50s would be a really good thing to do. I mean, in my lifetime, my childhood has now become history. I was born in 1940. So,
Hmm.
the time you're writing about, I was already reading crime fiction. And I think I'd really like seeing, although in parts it's really unnerving to have your life turn into history. But on the other hand, when you're living it, it's surprising how much of it you're oblivious to, especially because there wasn't, it wasn't a digital age, so information was harder to get. So in a way, reading your books, reveals to me things that were true in my life that I really wasn't aware of.
Yeah, I mean, like, I don't think history is not homogenous. It's like people can live and die like and not have access to whole swaths and whole subcultures and all and just little nooks and crannies of history that like we just don't know exist. The internet has sort of compressed everything for us today. Like we are sort of vaguely aware of all of these places and all of these different kinds of lives we could live. Um, Although I don't think we have like nearly as much of awareness as we think we do. But like back then, like you really there was no like single 1940s, there was no single 1950s. It depended on who you were
And where
and
you
where
were.
you were.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, we were all in, what's the fashionable word today? Siloed.
Yeah.
We were in our communities, and but there was a good thing in a way about, most of us got our news every night from Walter Cronkite, and as a result, we were more homogenous in some ways, even if we were more disparate in others.
That's true. Yeah. Yes. Because you had a single touchstone of like this is where you get the news. Or even like this is what we're watching on TV. When you had like network television and you had this many channels to choose from. You had singular points of conversation. Um, but yeah, anyway, that is a whole rabbit hole we could go down.
Well, it's just different. And as I'm like an eyewitness of it, I mean, I'm sure that happens to everybody who, is fortunate enough to grow old like I have, is that you do see, um, transitions. Um, but, when I was young, nobody even thought we'd get to the moon. And now, people are saying it's a hoax, or maybe we're going to go to Mars, or, whatever it all is. I mean, it's a huge jump from, I mean, a lot of the Cold War has kind of come back to us, and I've had many because we do tons of thriller writer events,
Mm,
and there are various points of conversation about when we were young, we were taught to like duck under the desk, in case of nuclear, which of course is ludicrous.
I know. What desks did we have? Like they're not lead
Right.
lined.
Or what would
Yeah.
happen if you were like walking home from school with an ice cream cone when the bomb hit? What would happen? But I mean, it really is fascinating in some ways, our understanding is so much more profound, because we know so much more. And yet at the same time, it really makes you more uncomfortable in a lot of ways, potential part is so, whoa.
Knowing everything, it's like, oh, now we know everything, and like, no, ignorance is can be bliss.
Well,
Um,
yeah,
can
but
be,
I
not
mean,
necessarily.
I really do think that your books, remind us that of how life was, but at the same time, there are so many parallels, moving forward. So I also think that right now, somebody asked me the other day why book sales seem to be going up. I mean, I have to admit that I have underordered for two or three events because I just didn't see that there was this kind of explosion of sales. And I think it's a bit right now like it was during the pandemic when, reading is a really comfortable escape, and especially historical fiction or cozy
Mm.
fiction or romantasy, I mean, basically you can just immerse yourself in Sex and Dragons and, why
Yes.
not? So, it's an interesting time, but I think books for people who love reading, books are a wonderful way to spend quite a lot of time not here.
Yes. Not here and not online. I think
Yes,
it's a big thing. Yeah. Yeah.
exercising our brains. So, are you still actively a journalist?
I am still actively a journalist. I've been actively a journalist for 25 years now. So there has not been a month that has gone by that I have not had a deadline. But yeah, I still write for the same. I've been writing for the same magazine for 20 years, 20 of those 25 years, covering federal healthcare and federal medicine and research and treatment.
Oh, it'd be an exciting
So
time right now for you then.
man, it's exciting is a word.
I'm trying,
There are
I'm
other words I would use, but yeah.
I know. I'm trying to. We have made an absolute commitment to being apolitical, and I want all of our customers to come to a safe and entertaining place. And so, but every once in a while, I find myself straying, and I think, nope, nope, nope. Bad barber, go back. But yes, I think healthcare is really a fascinating topic. After I read about the epidemic of measles breaking out in Texas, I thought, and then my husband raised the question. He said, how can we prove that we've been vaccinated? I mean, I've been vaccinated for everything, including like Japanese encephalitis, yellow fever 3 times. Anybody my age has been vaccinated for polio, and smallpox and all the rest of it. But Rob has a good point. How do we actually prove that? And so there may be a need for tests to develop, to prove that we in fact have had like measles vaccines if we want to go somewhere.
That's true. Yeah. I have a mother who is still alive and who keeps all the paperwork.
Okay.
Every scrap of paperwork I think that has involved my life that she has passed through her hands. She still has, and I know she still has all of my vaccination records from before I went to college because she
Wow.
showed them to me. So I'm set for that. Um,
Well, have her keep track of it. I'm hoping that the Mayo Clinic will figure out some kind of test to work all this out. But anyway, um, so why did you choose to write this period? I mean, I understand about Nero Wolfe and why that was an inspiration and all, but you could have updated it. Why did you decide consciously to stay in the 1940s?
I think. So I like the 1940s. I especially like the 1940s post-war, um, because during the war is like it's all about the war. Like that just has it's like such an impact and like it limits the stories you can tell. Um, but the period between like 1945 and say like 50, 51, 52, um, just seems like this massive pivot point in American culture where you have like all of these soldiers coming home um and trying to find new like figuring out like who they are now after having seen what they've seen and the country figuring out what it is now um in this post World War II world and you have this like the beginning of the transformation into the that suburban 1950s idea of what the golden age, what people would consider like the golden age of America. Um, and like in order to get there, like a lot of things had to change. A lot of uh basically I've said like you had to pave over a lot of people in order to create this new landscape of America. And so putting these characters there at that point in this like very liminal space of American history is fun because I get to sort of usher off the last vestiges of the 20s and 30s, which I got to do in Fortune Favors the Dead, where you had the crime happening at this very wealthy Upper West Side party with a rich family right out of the 1920s. And you can see like their family and their business is like crumbling. It's like starting to like time is catching up with them. Um, and then I get to like sort of usher in the Lavender Scare, and eventually the McCarthy hearings and the Red Scare and that entire the era of America. So yeah, so like that right on the heels of World War II was where I chose. And that I do not regret that. Like that I think has
I
been
don't know why
fun.
you regret it. No, I think it's
Yeah.
a fascinating time. You do continue. Talk to me about the margarine war. I bet you don't know about that if you're going to be coloring up things here.
No, wait,
No, I'm not going to talk about it now, but
okay.
just an example of the kind of thing
Things
I
I
can
gotta Google.
remember. from my age of, of the Martyrdom War was really fascinating. Anyway, Patrick, come and talk to us and see if we have any questions in the audience.
Let's see here. No real questions that I'm trying to identify. They're all people are watching and they're really enjoying the conversation. I'm trying to find any. We were talking about James Lee Burke a little bit, which is
Patrick has a whole chat going on. Well, so I mean, Pat, this our defense against Zoom bombing is that everybody has to send their questions and comments and all through Patrick,
yeah.
Mm.
which has been absolutely effective. But what it really means is that a lot of people have their own sort of like private conversation.
Yeah, there's a question here. I mean, you talked a little bit about this, but if you were to do a departure, a completely different kind of book, are there any ideas that you have on the back burner?
Um, yes. Not even the back burner anymore. I've spent the last like in between the writing, I think Murder Crossed Your Mind and then The Frame. I've been working on one contemporary mystery thriller that is, I think, right at this moment with my editor. So like for consideration, not for editing. Like my agent has sent it out. So like I now I had to deal with cell phones and the internet. Um, and then I am right now sort of like working on the first draft of like it's not I'm afraid it's historical. It takes place in the 1980s. It's another like it's a more adult voiced mystery set in 1986, which I want to say it's contemporary, but it's not. 1980s is historical now. So
It's
yeah, so that's
high school for me, so I know that era really well.
yeah, yeah, yeah. So that is what I've been working on. I'm sorry for being super vague, because if they go anywhere, I wanna keep it all spoiler free. Um, but yeah, otherwise I'm like plotting out some future Pentecost and Parker short stories.
What about, I know you're a playwright. I'm not sure if Barbara mentioned much about that so far, but any work in that realm in recent times?
In recent, so I wrote, so the pandemic was uh unpleasant for live theater. Um, but it was kind of like fortunate that I sort of pivoted to novel writing around that time. Or that my first novel sold at that time. Um, so it was not until this past summer that I wrote my first full play since the pandemic. Like full play did not have any notes prior. Um, and that's out at like at some theaters for consideration, some festivals consideration right now. Um, and then I was recently up in Williamsport, Pennsylvania at Lycoming College, where they are right now rehearsing my play Girl in the Red Corner um, up there, so which I think goes up in 2 weeks. Time is mushy these days. But yeah, so I still have like plays that are being done um, across the country, and I'm trying to work on new ones and keep those muscles limber, um, since it's
Did
sort of like
did you write plays first before attempting a novel? Or which one came first and how did they compare?
plays mostly came first. I think back in like college, I no, I don't think I attempted a novel in college. No, plays came first. I got my MFA in playwriting. I was a playwriting. I've been a playwright and like I've taught playwriting for years. And then my wife is a young adult novelist. She sold her first book in 2012. So like the world of novel writing and the entire publishing, like that whole experience of the publishing industry sort of like seeped into like I got to see how that all worked from the sidelines. Um
Crazy
and she
making,
would yeah, and
imagine.
she was the one who like first prodded me into like, hey, this is a good idea. You should maybe write this. It was not Pentecostal Parker. It was a previous another idea. Um, and it was a young adult novel, and it was very good practice. Um, but like it sort of like helped me start building the writing muscles to do something more long form. So yeah, playwriting first, then novels.
Did the two forms complement each other in your mind, or
Uh, yes, yes. Playwriting playwriting and journalism are both great training grounds for writing whodunits because there's every all of it is so much about structure. Like mysteries are just like eh, you have the whodunit structure, which is just like a scaffolding that allows me to like creates a form where I can like tell character-driven stories. Um, but I've got to be like real tight, and the dominoes have to just all hit each other. I can't meander. It doesn't have to be like a Rube Goldberg machine, but in that vein. But where playwriting, you also have such limited theatrical real estate, like in that you have very little space, you have very little time, you have a limited audience attention. So it's also very, very plot driven. Like all the dominoes have to hit each other. One thing has to cause another, has to cause another. Um, and so that sort of like spareness was great training for writing mysteries. Yeah.
is there much in the way of like classic overlap of the two genres? I mean, forgive my ignorance in this respect, but I know that there's the Mousetrap and there's probably a bunch of other kind of mysteries that were adapted for stage.
I mean, yeah, yeah, there are a bunch of, I mean, several Agatha Christie
Yeah.
have gotten adapted for stage. Oh, I'm blanking on who has done a lot of the adapting. But yeah, no, I think Agatha Christie especially. It's like and also I think a little bit of Sherlock Holmes. Like those names will draw people to a theater just because they're familiar and
Sure.
yeah.
Well, many of the Golden Age crime writers were also playwrights, are very interested in theater. Niall Marsh in New Zealand, she was probably New Zealand's, whole theatrical engine there for a long time.
Mm.
Many of them were very interested in theater. Surely writing for theater must really help you writing dialogue in a novel.
Oh yeah, like dialogue. I mean, that's why there are chunks of every Pentecostal Parker novel that are just transcriptions of interviews,
Mhm.
because I'm like, look, you don't need to know what people's hands are doing in this scene. You just need to know what they're saying. And it gives me the sort of the opportunity to cheat a little bit. So like the dialogue comes super easy, but it is like but so much of a novel is just figuring out how to get people across a room and how to describe what people's hands are doing and their faces are doing, um, and what they're wearing. That's one of the things that like playwriting that was one of the hurdles going from a playwright to being a novelist is that with a playwright or with writing plays, I'm working with a ton of other collaborators. I'm working with actors, I'm working with costume designers and sound designers and lighting designers. I never have to think about what a character in a scene is wearing unless it's like like specific. Whereas in the novel, I have to think constantly about what Will is wearing, which is probably why Will has become, over the course of 5 books, a bit of a clothes horse. Because I have spent so much time looking up fashion from the 1940s, and I'm like, we're gonna put this to use.
She's
Um,
wearing a lot of denim in this book. I noticed that, in the early parts of it. And you do call it denim. You don't, call it blue jeans or whatever.
I'm going to believe you. I do.
No, it's true. I
I don't
just reread
remember.
it. No, I mean, when she's coming back from the woods, she's
Oh
in,
yeah, yeah, that's right.
and then she changes into denim somewhere else after the house has been searched.
Very
And,
possible.
so, but I thought it was interesting because today you'd probably just call them jeans, but, you're calling
Yeah.
them denim.
Yeah. I think I got all the names directly from the Sears catalog. I have so many Sears catalogs from the 1940s saved on my computer. Yeah.
Lots of
Oh,
gabardine shirts and spectator shoes and stuff like that.
Yeah. Men's fashion is terrible. Like, that is so terribly boring. It's just what kind of wool are we wearing in our suits and stuff like that.
Right. Well, fashion in the 1950s wasn't terribly exciting all the way around. That's why
Yeah.
there was such an explosion of it when we got to the, the flower power generation.
Yes. Yeah.
Because the 50s was sort of uniform and boring. Donna Reed would come in and swirl around, in the same
Mm.
dress when she opened the door on the television set or whatever. I remember the poodle skirt and, saddle shoes and all those things that if you wanted to conform in high school, the word, there would be like a telephone ring saying, tomorrow we all have to wear, saddle shoes or nobody's wearing socks or, come in a pool or have a crinoline or whatever. I mean, but the guys all look the same all the time.
It's a buzz
Yeah.
cuts and
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. Mohawks. I mean, yeah, men did more with their hair. And that's why the
Mm.
Beatles in part were such a huge influence,
Oh,
because
yeah.
short hair was so de rigueur that, and all of a sudden we got these kids, with like hair, it caused an enormous ruckus. It really did. Wow. Well, Stephen, it's really been a pleasure to talk to you again. Patrick, do we have anything you'd like to wind up?
You know what? I don't think so. I think,
Hey,
yeah.
well, in that case, thank you for spending an hour with us
Well,
once
thank
again,
thank
Stephen.
you for inviting me.
Not at
Yeah.
all. Our pleasure. And we do still have some signed copies here. I'm holding one. Patrick has one. So we have
Yep.
two for sure of Dead of the Frame. And the backlist, Stephen's earlier books are available in paperback. In fact, one of them is coming out in March, if I remember. I think I just wrote it up.
No,
Or
it was
maybe February.
it came out in December. The paperback for Murder
I
Cross
know what
Romero. Yeah.
happened. We lost track of a couple of catalogs. So for me, it's coming out in
Okay.
March.
Excellent.
Right. I just put it into our March newsletter, but you're right. It did come out in December. We had several oops that we kind of overlooked there, but we're fixing it. Anyway, thank you all very much for joining us tonight. Thank you, Stephen.
Okay,
Hope
thank you.
everybody